So we're each gonna give a brief presentation. I represent the snake oil side. Eric represents the research side. Nicole represents the highly pragmatic clinical side. So let me get started here. So this is, if you ever emailed me, this is my signature on my email. So take a quick look at it. This is written over 2,000 years ago. And I'm constantly reminded that we should do these things as part of our life. But one of the things in here about alcohol is always a question. Drink, don't drink. And according to this guy, don't drink. And you know what? I agree with him. You should never drink alone. But you should drink with friends, and that's social nutrition. I put this up last year, and I'll go over it real briefly again. The things that we care about in clinical medicine as a doctor at private medical when I'm out seeing patients is it safe and is it effective? And so when anybody shows you a supplement, a peptide, or whatever it is, the questions are, is it safe, isn't it effective, and can you prove it? Can you show me the evidence? If it's safe and effective, it's probably FDA approved. If it's safe and not effective, and there's a lot of things that fall into that category, great, do them, you're just losing some money. But if it's effective and not safe, like taking high doses of a lot of things, you can feel great, but it really wears down your body, and I'm gonna tell you some stories about that. Obviously, if it's safe and not effective, you're an idiot. So this is a case study of a friend of mine who called me up and said, hey, great health, 3 kids, nothing going on with him. And he says, I'm gonna go see this. He called me and he said, hey, I've got a problem I need you to help me with. I said, well, what's the problem? He said, well, I have a brain tumor. I was like, oh my God, that's awful. I said, well, let me dig into what's going on with you. So he said, well, I went to see this longevity doctor and she put me on some supplements. Were you taking anything before? No. This is what he was taking, okay? So if you look at the top, for the top like third of it or more, half, is all the supplements in the morning. And then in the middle is the before the workout supplements, and then the evening supplements, and then the bedtime supplements. I'm gonna point to 2 of these in particular. So he had a brain tumor. It was a meningioma, not a glioblastoma, which can kill you. And this is his brain tumor, where that arrow is. And so as I was researching his brain tumor, I come up with some research that showed that certain hormones can make gliomas grow bigger, like blow them like a balloon. And I put up in the upper left the hormones that this person had put him on. We immediately stopped all of his supplements. The tumor stopped growing. He is stable and fine years later. It was a benign tumor that blew up like a balloon and started compressing his optic nerve. So like things that seem fine, even though that list does not seem fine, come with consequences. So this is another a member of the practice who said, I want to do some L-carnitine. For those of doctors in the room, you probably heard of this company. And he said, my wellness, longevity, fitness guy said, I need to be injecting this. Will you buy this for me? And I said, well, why would you want to inject something in your body if you didn't know really what it did? The same safety and efficacy questions. And then he said, so I asked him another question, which like stimulated him to think a little harder. I said, how do you know what's in there? And he said, well, it says so right there. I mean, it must be in there. It says so. And it's a reputable company. He did the homework on it. And I said, well, you know what? There's a guy that I know called David Light from a company called Valisure in New York that does this testing on all sorts of medications and that come into the United States to make sure they're pure. But he does it for huge, like Teva and huge pharmaceutical companies. And I called him and I said, hey, can you run a sample for me on this vial? And he goes, Jordan, we don't really do small one-off things like this. He said, but for you, I'll do it. So we sent it into his lab. And he did it as a favor. It cost some money, but we paid for it. And I got an email from him saying, Jordan, you got to call me. And I was like, oh, you don't like getting a call from the CEO from a big testing company saying, call me. So I'm going to show you what was in this vial here. Do you want to see what's in this vial? Okay. So this is what's in the vial. So at the top, you can see that there is the L-carnitine in there. But underneath there's 5,2-aminopropyl 2,3,1-hydro-H-indene, which is an MDMA derivative. It is a psychoactive substance. You will feel, promotes weight loss and improves overall well-being. But there's also, of course you're gonna feel good and go on Instagram and tell everybody how great you're feeling. But there's also an herbicide in there. An herbicide, things that kill weeds. Then there's also a fatty acid casein product, which is a contaminant. There's another MDMA derivative psychoactive substance, and there's another random tetromethylphosphonium ion. This is a dirty vial, and people are putting stuff in their bodies all the time. And it's like, why would you do that? And then I'm sure a lot of you read about this. There was a big peptide conference in Las Vegas last month or 2 months ago. 2 people went to the hospital. I don't know really how they're doing, but it's dangerous. Like, all this stuff is dangerous. And we have all these things that are being promoted on Instagram and all over the place. But it's really important that we ask these critical questions. My job is to have a good BS meter all the time. And I think, if you walk away from one thing here, everyone should have a great BS meter, because everyone's trying to sell you longevity, and there are real things. And so what is longevity? And so my definition of longevity is to maintain your optimal mental and physical health for as long as possible with the fewest interactions with the healthcare system, because people get sick in hospitals. And the healthcare system is not, the more money, the sicker you get, the more money they make. That's just the sad truth of the system. So the questions I will leave you with is, what is your health and longevity strategy? And not your tactics, but your overarching strategy. Who are your trusted advisors in the same way you have advisors for everything else? Who do you really trust to be in your corner for these things? And why do you make the decisions that you do? I think it's a really important question to ask yourself when you decide to do something. Because ultimately, we all want to live like the bottom line here and not the top line, which is health span that we're going to talk about a lot. And William Osler said, medicine's the science of uncertainty and the art of probability. So that's just how it goes. Oops, there it is. So remember that what you spend time doing now, you might not be able to ever get back. So on that note, I'm going to hand it over to
Thank you, Jordan.
Nicole.
Nicole.
Come on up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I loved the commercial, and it really was a spontaneous idea from Jordan that I wholeheartedly encouraged, and it came out fabulously. So I am going to start us off with a story that I think helped me really crystallize what our problem is right now. And this is a true story. Okay, so I, like many of you, I'm sure, are extremely curious about what people are doing in these clinics, not just what they say they're doing, but what's actually happening. And so I went, I'm often mystery shopping, but I do it full disclosure. I'm a physician. I work at Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi. I am, also leading a healthier living healthcare company. And so I feel like that's the only fair thing to do in these interactions. So I went in, and I had a full checkup through this clinic, and it was, I thought, well done. The physician spent a lot of time with me, asked me a lot of questions. We went through a series of tests. One of those tests was an electrocardiogram, and the nurse took my test 4 times. She printed out 4 ECGs, and I said, okay, we're going to have a conversation now. So the doctor comes in, and he says, very seriously, I think you need to go to the emergency room. And I'm sitting there, perfectly healthy, and also not having any chest pain, no symptoms. And I just politely said, I understand I have a normal variant on my ECG. Would you feel comfortable if I just talked to my cardiology friend, and he gave you the reassurance? Okay, we did that. He was reassured. We went on with our visit. And then I realized I didn't know what kind of doctor he was, right? So at the end of the visit, I just asked him, what kind of training do you have? And he told me he was a urologist, okay? So now, I love urologists, okay? I have many urology friends, but I think they would all agree they're not the first one to raise their hand to read your ECG, right? And they have a role in this kind of medicine. How do you keep us healthy? There's a clear role for urologists, but it's not reading my ECG, right? So I walked out of that visit, and I just thought, we have a problem. We have people who are not qualified to do the things that they're doing. And in addition, we have the testing and the supplements and many things that are just not proven. So why would we lower our standards? Why would we have a different approach to keeping you healthy as we do to when we take care of you being sick? And so, okay, I very clearly had this thought that we need to make a different approach, right? And so what we did in the Institute, and what we're really encouraging at this conference, is for us to think about how do we make sure that we have what is necessary in order to practice this kind of medicine. Okay, we don't yet have a name for what we're doing. We're keeping people healthy. We're expanding health span. There is a movement to call this precision geromedicine, and we've had many conversations around how do we get people to understand what that is. And the concepts here are, let's put standards in place, and let's think about how is it that we can really think about what happens inside the healthcare system, what happens outside. So we know that this is really what our health system is at the moment, right? We have this tap that is flowing, and it's really just overwhelming, right? We're mopping up the floor, and we really don't have anyone who's turning off that tap. And so part of our goal here is to think about how do we turn off that tap, and how do we empower people with information that's actually accurate that they can use. And so what we have been discussing is, number one, everyone does not do everything. We have to have standards. We've written the first standards with the Department of Health of Abu Dhabi and the Healthy Longevity Medicine Society to try to take a stab at this. We now have standards published by a government that say this is longevity medicine, this isn't longevity medicine, and we used healthy longevity medicine as the name of it at that time, which again is still part of the debate. But what we would love to think about and talk about together is what is it? What are we talking about? How do we make sure that that is, again, at the level of the standards that you would expect when you or your loved one goes to see a rheumatologist or a cardiologist or a general surgeon? And so I think our message here is, why would we lower our standards when everyone's lives depend on them? We actually are trying to help people stay healthy. We should be thinking about all the levels of science and knowledge that we need in order to do that. So I'm going to leave you with this, and we'll pass over to
Eric.
The good Eric.
Right. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you, Nicole.
Good morning, everyone. Just to be sure, that the commercial was nothing to do with the Buck Institute. I think it was called the Uck Institute, or the Yuck Institute, or whatever. Anyway, delighted to be here and to see you all. I just wanted to give you the perspective from the basic science, in some way trying to answer the question, why are we here today talking about longevity in medicine? And the reason is that about 25 years ago, actually 30 years ago, a whole series of labs, 3 major labs, Cynthia Kenyon, Tom Johnson, Gary Rifkin, Lenny Garante, identified mutations that could control the aging process. And those were, at the time, completely unexpected. The idea that you can make a single point mutation in an animal model and, in some cases, double its lifespan just went against everything that people had postulated aging was made of. But it also highlighted the possibility that if you can modify a single gene and increase lifespan, that you could actually identify a drug in the future that would do the same thing. That really is why we are here today, 30 years later. That also speaks about the speed at which basic discoveries get to be translated into the clinic. And what was thought initially to be an anomaly or an aberration, distrusted by many people actually in the field, has really been validated. There are now, in some animal species, more than 700 genes that you can target that will result in an increase in lifespan. And obviously, this brings the question, what does this mean for humanity, for us, for our own lifespan? Are these applications going to be translatable to the clinic? And in some way, this meeting is a representation of that conflict, that tension between the pace of discovery, what we can do in the laboratory setting, and its relevance to the clinic. And it's actually getting pretty extraordinary. And many of you who know me know that I've positioned the Buck Institute as a sort of the voice of reason, as an organization that really stands by the principles that have led us to where we are today, which is evidence-based, reproducible, safe, and so on. But it's hard when working in this field not to become truly excited. And so I'm going to play a little bit of the advocate of what's to come and why this debate is actually incredibly important. So if I can have my first slide. Several of us here in this audience attended a meeting which has emerged as one of the biggest meetings in the longevity space that integrates the clinic, the laboratories, the pharma, and so on. And this is called ARDD. It takes place in Copenhagen. And for the first time, there was a heavy big pharma presence. Typically, big pharma has stayed away from the field for a number of reasons. They view it as full of sort of hyperbole and hype, but this year, pretty much every big pharma was there. And as you can see from the title, two of them embraced GLP-1 agonists, Ozempic, Mounjaro, all these drugs that we hear nonstop. They embraced them as longevity drugs. And I think this was truly extraordinary to watch. The two who gave the very visible talks were Lotte Knudsen from Novo Nordisk. She's one of the key architects of that whole program. She said semaglutide as a proven longevity medicine. Dr. Andrew Adams, who's the CSO at Eli Lilly, asked the questions, are GLP-1s the first longevity drugs? And I think there's, if you look at the data, there is a lot of evidence that points to the fact that these drugs are globally protective. They have not been globally protective against kidney aging, heart aging, Alzheimer's. There are now clinical trials looking at the prevention of Alzheimer's disease by these drugs. Obviously, this is not all proven, but we also live in a world where these drugs are available, approved. What are you supposed to do as a longevity physician if someone comes to see you and says, I have a heavy family history, the risks are minimal, should I take the drug? According to the most rigorous standards, you would say, no, you should not go on these drugs. But frankly, many people are not waiting for our advice. They're finding doctors who will prescribe these drugs. And I think we're going to be living at that interface where the informed patients, the educated patients are coming and they're demanding these drugs. Rapamycin is another really good example, approved drug that you can go on today. How are we supposed to be positioned? And frankly, the fear, from my standpoint, is that many of these patients go first to the serious clinics. If they're turned down, they're going to go to the less, they'll go to Noom, where you can buy actually rapamycin online or GLP-1 agonists online. So we see a proliferation of all these companies. And I think my recommendation would be that the serious longevity clinics should adopt a sort of a different stance from the traditional medicine, which is to only approve things that have been proven and to be open to accompany the patients in their self-experimentation. If this was not enough, I think this is just want to give you a hint of what's to come. There's a program run by the NIH called ITP, Intervention Testing Program, where they have, any scientist can nominate a drug to be tested in a cohort of mice for lifespan extension. They've tested close to 70 different drugs. 11 of them increase lifespan. And I've highlighted here in red all of the ones that are actually approved drugs that are available today. And I can tell you that a lot of people are not waiting. They're finding their doctors to prescribe these drugs and experiment. Again, the same tension. And if this was not bad enough or not exciting enough, 3 days ago, a paper came out in Cell that documented for the first time a 5-year rejuvenation of older macaques using stem cell preparation. So paper published in the top journal showing 5-year rejuvenation using human cells transplanted into macaques. Hard to see these types of results without being incredibly excited. And I can guarantee you some of you clinicians are going to have people knocking on your door within the next 2 weeks with that paper and saying, what do I do about this? So just wanted to throw in the excitement from the basic science, but also all the important questions that this brings to us as a field. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. So I think that what I'm taking from the three perspectives that you have, you all share kind of, I think, a common sense of principle and integrity. You're a bit more cautious. You're clinical and you want to see this move forward. You see really exciting research, and you don't want to lose the optimism that has driven this enterprise of better health. But I think the question then becomes, you use the term, Eric, it's bad and exciting, which, you know, is a little bit of an oxymoron, but I understand it, and that is you know, informing the problem that you've all identified. People will get what they want, whether or not they go through traditional medicine. So I think the first question really is, given this somewhat Wild West environment that we're in right now, how do we define what is a longevity doctor?
Well, I turn that over to Nicole. I think that all primary care, the goal of primary care is prevention and managing issues as they are to prevent you from falling into a ditch in the future. And just doing that is a kind of a definition of longevity. Then there's the extension and the reversing and the rejuvenation, which I think is another part, which in my field, that's like, I mean, what I just heard just now from Eric was like, wow, like, how will I incorporate that? I don't know. But I think it's an interesting question. I mean, there are people going to see ophthalmologists who are longevity doctors. I mean, everyone, ER doctors are becoming longevity doctors. So I do think, going back to Nicole's point, it is important that when you want something, you understand the substrate of who's giving it to you, and are they just trying to make money? You know, cui bono, what's the motivation? And B, to my other slides, is what's in it? Like, if you're gonna we're gonna hear from some stem cell researchers later, but if you're gonna do stem cells, like, how do you know what's in it?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to approach this like we have in other parts of medicine, in my opinion. So this means we need standards for what the clinic does and doesn't do. What does the doctor need to have as a training, which, by the way, we don't yet have a certification set up. So there are now groups that are calling themselves board certification. You can get board certified in longevity medicine, but what does that mean? So there was a conference that one of these groups was running, and I was sitting with Nir Barzilai, and we were chatting about all of the field, and I raised my hand and asked one simple question. If you have a board certification, normally that's issued by a board and it's accredited by a third party, right? So I asked very simply, who is accrediting this board certification? And the answer was, well, we are. Okay. So, and then of course Nir also had his hand up, and then they didn't call on him because he happened to be sitting next to me, and we're obviously chatting about.
Well, that's not the spirit of spicy debate that we wish for.
Yeah. So we have to have a process where we understand. Now, can a urologist or a plastic surgeon train themselves in another part of medicine? Absolutely. But there should be a process that you go through to say that this is now where your expertise lies. And until we get there, we have to be extremely, extremely careful consumers of this kind of medicine. And the conflict of interest piece that Jordan raised is absolutely at the heart of this. Is this person selling you something? And do they have a financial interest in you saying, yes, I want to take that treatment, right? And you have to be able to separate those things out. So we have to be very smart consumers and get to how do I know that this person's incentive is to keep me healthy, right? And then I think we need to have the standards. We're working on developing educational materials for people that have been validated and verified, but that takes time.
I'm curious, Eric, what would you see as the next steps that could be taken to get towards that structure? Or, as many in the world I come from of tech might say, those structures are old and stupid and, you know, can't deal with the reality of what's coming, so we need new structures.
I completely agree. And I used to, when I started this, I argued that we had to reform medicine based on some of the new principles. The idea that health is a continuum, that it starts, you know, the aging process starts at 30, that there are lifestyle interventions that can be done. Just to be sure, there are other doctors who already have applied lifestyle medicine. There's a specialization called lifestyle medicine. But I think longevity medicine goes one step further. And I also think that we're at this critical junction where we have to establish a formal recognition of what it is. And I think this is what the field should be working on. There are other forms of medicine that have focused on primary care. functional medicine, integrative medicine. All of them have acquired sort of an aura of trying unproven interventions, but they had one very important aspect, which is they looked at the individual as an integrated biological person, and they really accompanied people throughout their whole lives. So I think longevity medicine has to be anchored in science, and it has to be anchored in proven therapies. So I think we've argued that when you talk to people who are running longevity clinics, many of them express the frustration that it's very hard. The hardest problem is to recruit physicians who are actually properly trained. And I'll give you really one example that actually applied to me. My blood sugar, I'm in my late 60s. My blood sugar was, around age 60, my blood sugar was 98. And I showed this to my physician, and he told me that you're in the normal range. I said, I'm in the normal range, but when I hit 100, I'm pre-diabetic. That doesn't sound like really good. And we know blood sugar keeps increasing during lifespan. So that whole approach of a normal range, the same for your blood pressure. If your blood pressure is 130 or 125 over 90, your doctor is going to say you are in the normal range. Longevity medicine looks at this in a completely different way. This is normal, but it's not optimal. And so this idea that our whole biological process, our health, is a process that can be optimized throughout life, for me, is one of the foundations of longevity medicine. And so just to continue my story, not accepting this blood sugar of 98, I started metformin, and I tried a whole series of interventions. Again, an unproven drug, but lo and behold, my blood sugar now is 84. And I feel a lot better knowing that I'm walking around with a blood sugar of 84 than 98. That, for me, is really sort of epitomizes some of the challenges that the traditional medicine deals with, and that where longevity could bring a whole new dimension. The whole idea is also the whole prevention studies, whole body MRI, liquid biopsies. There's a whole series of interventions, technologies that are coming online that will change the way we do medicine to make it much more proactive. The bottom line, so to finish the way I started, I said we had to reform medicine. I don't think we can reform medicine. I've become convinced, but talking to a lot of colleagues and physicians, that medicine is almost, I would call it a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is an economic system that works very well if you are in it. It works for the hospitals, it works for the doctors. It doesn't really work so well for the patients. And the question is, we need to invent a new form of medicine. And that medicine is not going to, hopefully will put traditional medicine a little bit out of business by preventing a lot of the diseases on which medicine is relying today. So this whole idea of replacing sick care from true health care, accompanying people throughout their lives to make them healthier and at the end happier.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in, I think, on the business model question, which I think is interesting. At private medical where we work, 25 years ago when I started this, it was because I was being asked by the HMO to see a patient from every 10 minutes to every 7 minutes. And I just felt like my soul was being sucked out. And I said, well, maybe if I just leave this insurance model and charge the actual person money, then my incentive now is to keep you healthy. I don't make money the sicker you get. The more visits I have, the more money I make. That's the old model. And so I do think and that's why the concierge medicine whole realm has exploded, because it's a market failure. The hospitals make more money with specialists than they do with primary care doctors, so they just kind of poop on us and make us do more for less, and then we just get crushed and we say, okay, we're leaving. And so like 10,000 primary care doctors like every quarter are leaving, not a quarter, every year are leaving the insurance model, or they're joining pharma, or they're retiring. So I do think if there's a model that exists where if I do an intervention and it's bad for you, like I lose.
Yeah.
That should be a better model. I don't know how to structure that.
And
Nicole, I'm going to let you have the last word, because unfortunately we're running late, and I promised I'd keep everyone on time.
Can I have one?
Yeah, more than one word.
One word.
Yes.
Okay. So this idea of the incentives having to be aligned is really at the crux of how this is actually going to roll out across the world. Someone has to pay to keep you healthy, right? And if the insurance companies are only going to pay when they keep you sick, then we have a problem. It's going to have to come out of your own pocket, and then we get into the consumer realm, right? So one of the things we're doing in Abu Dhabi, which I think is one of the first governments to really commit to this, is actually doing a randomized clinical trial within the public health system, comparing our model of care, which is almost 100% lifestyle medicine at this point because we don't have these drugs out there, but that you can compare that to standard of care to show clinical and cost effectiveness, because at the end of and it's being paid for by the national health insurance. So at the end of the day, if we walk out with a blueprint that says this model of care keeps people healthy and saves you money as a system, then we have at least put the foundation in place for the structure for it to be paid for. And then we have to work on the education to make sure that whatever new therapies are coming out, how people are dealing with the new technologies, we can have them studied. And one of the way to do this is actually self-funded studies. So one of the things we're doing is setting up a structure where a patient can come in and say, I want to try this stem cell therapy, and they can self-fund it just because they'd have to go fund it themselves in the consumer world, but that they can do it under a research arm. So it's in a trusted environment where you can come in and pay your 25 grand, no problem, but you do it in a monitored setting. And those are also sprouting up all over in different clinics. So if we get the incentives aligned, and if we can really think about the experimentation that people are wanting and wanting to do under a monitored setting, then I think we'll get there faster.
So as much as I want to have Q&A, this session is meant to be a provocation to get everyone thinking about the sort of bigger framing issues that are going to inform everything we're going to talk about all day today and throughout the most of tomorrow. So please join me in thanking the provokers.